Greetings Earth folk and welcome to my channel. My name is Shannon, but my friends all call me Shay, and I was recently diagnosed with ASD or Autism Spectrum Disorder. I also have ADHD, GAD and OCD, so if any of these topics are interesting to you, please subscribe to my channel. The journey that got me to this point, to this diagnosis, is one that I think is really important to share. There's so much misinformation about ASD, even amongst professionals, that people living with the condition are struggling their entire lives, living in the dark, without any support. Just a few months ago, I was sitting with the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and it's pretty common for autistic women to get misdiagnosed with BPD, and I really want to get into detail with this, but I'll do that in another video. Just a quick disclaimer, there's a saying that goes, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Autism is a spectrum. There are many different experiences, so I do not speak for the entire autistic community, I only speak for myself. So let's start with a simple question. What exactly is ASD? This is actually a complex question, and it's not something I can answer in this video alone, because there is so much more to it than the average definition allows. But in layman's terms, autism spectrum disorder is a group of neurodevelopmental disorders that impact the way a person processes information, interacts socially, and behaves. Autism is not something you can develop in adulthood, it's something that you're essentially born with. However, a lot of people go undiagnosed and they only get diagnosed in adulthood. And this is due to the fact that for years there have been a limited number of resources regarding autism spectrum disorders. Hopefully this changes with the newer generation. Also, people learn to mask their idiosyncrasies, so a lot of their autistic presentations can go unnoticed for a long time. Autism also comes with comorbidities, and in a sense, these comorbidities can actually mask the autistic traits. Because if you go to a psychologist and you say that you're having severe anxiety in this and this and this area, they're more likely to diagnose you with an anxiety disorder than jump to autism. And treating the anxiety, for example, without knowing you're autistic is kind of like treating a symptom without knowing the cause. Unfortunately, that's what it was like for me for most of my life. I have always suffered with severe anxiety and depression and OCD, even though a lot of these diagnoses only came later in life as well. I've seen plenty psychologists and psychiatrists, I've tried a whole range of medications, I've made really significant lifestyle changes. And while these things were certainly helpful, I was never fully convinced because I felt that my struggles went deeper than my psychology. But it never occurred to me or any of these professionals that I could be on the spectrum. I was 13 when I was first diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. At 15, I was diagnosed with ADHD, panic disorder, and major depression. And in my early 20s came the BPD diagnosis, OCD diagnosis, and some other anxiety disorders. I'd get better, learn better coping mechanisms, but I never really got to a point where felt like I could function in modern society like an average person. And I think that's when I really realized there is something deeper going on. My sister was the first to point out that I have some autistic traits. And this was about 9 years ago when I was still a teenager and she was doing a psychology course. And this is often the case with people who are closest to you because you feel safe enough to be yourself around them, so you don't feel the need to mask and they can actually see who you truly are, and they're the ones who generally pick up on these things. Later, another person pointed out to me that I have some autistic traits, and then another person. And after I profusely denied being on the spectrum earlier this year, after a friend pointed out to me that my presentations were in line with autism, I fell into a deep depression. For about 2 months, I could hardly get out of bed. I was having daily suicidal ideation and I just felt hopeless. A big part of that reason is because no matter what I tried to feel better, I felt like I was always going back to the same rut that I was in from when I was a child. The same struggles that I've had all of my life. I just couldn't seem to get rid of them. I blamed myself for not trying hard. I I made up every excuse in the world, but I knew in my heart that that wasn't true. So I started to do some research on autism. I read medical journals, I looked at advocacy websites, I joined a bunch of platforms to speak to people on the spectrum. I watched YouTube videos, I joined social media groups, and one thing that I realized is that autism is not black and white. It is the whole damn rainbow. The media has sensationalized autism, and they only show us a very small fraction of what the autism spectrum really looks like. And this is why so many people have a warped idea of what autism is, including myself some months ago. But in reality, ASD looks very different for everyone. Exposing myself to all of this information made one thing abundantly clear. I was very likely on the spectrum, but autism also shares some traits with ADHD, BPD, and some neurological disorders. So I wasn't sure whether or not to get assessed. I reached out to a friend on the spectrum and I asked for her opinion. I told her my story and she really helped me understand autism better and understand myself better. I eventually booked an appointment with the neurologist, who then ruled out any neurological relation to my presentations. And then she referred me for an autism spectrum disorder assessment. I also booked an appointment with a psychiatrist, and she was very convinced that I do not have or do not tick all the boxes for borderline, and seemed to think that ASD was a much more likely explanation for my struggles and behaviors. She encouraged me to get the assessment too, so that is what I did. I had to wait a month and a half for the assessment, which by the way is crazy quick. The assessment took me about 5 hours. I thought I did so great. I thought that my results would come back as negative for ASD, but after 6 weeks I got the email, a whole 19 pages long, and under official diagnosis it said autism spectrum disorder. It was like a light bulb just suddenly went on in my head. Everything that I had struggled with since my childhood, everything I found so difficult up until now, had an explanation. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't lazy, I was and I am autistic. I don't want girls to have to wait until they're 25 for a diagnosis, because early understanding can really significantly make your life better and more enjoyable. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'm hoping to create a safe space for people to ask questions, to educate themselves and the people closest to them on autism and ADHD and mental illnesses, and that's really what I'm hoping for this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.